Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Dr. Greer. Thank you for
Hello.
being here.
Thank
We have an
you.
exciting afternoon planned. We're going to be speaking about Buga Sphere developments, and then we're going to have Ashton Forbes join us in the next 30 minutes talking about the MH370 flight. And so let's get started.
Yes, hello everyone. Thanks for supporting our membership and being part of our group. It helps fund a lot of what we're doing in our research. And speaking of which, I think most of you had heard that the Buga Sphere was carbon dated to 12,560 years ago, which of course is almost 3 times older than the Great Pyramid. And that is based on the resin material that are in the equatorial ports around the middle of the equator of the Buga Sphere. And since then, we got the results from a very prestigious lab for the metallurgy, and that's an analysis of it. And the gamma ray emissions were a baseline, indicating that this object had not spent any significant time in outer space. Now, doesn't it tell us where it originated from? Since if it had originated on another planet or even been put together out of Earth material by an ET ancient civilization or human advanced civilization connected to the ETs, we don't know which. I think it's probably more extraterrestrial in origin. It wouldn't show that if it had not spent significant time out in space getting gamma ray bombardment, or pass through space. So we'll get into this in a little bit about how you manufacture extraterrestrial materials. What's more interesting is the metallurgical analysis. Now, we always knew it was 90+% aluminum, but what we've got now is a whole list of 15 or 20 elements that are in this compound, this alloy. And there's no alloy on the planet that matches this aluminum alloy that the shell of the sphere is made of. There's not a match. There's some that are similar. And what's interesting is that in some of the elements, and I'm not going to bore you with all that, is that the some of them are elements which were not even discovered until the late 1800s or early 1900s. And since the Buga Sphere itself is dated to 12,560 years ago, that is remarkable. Those particular rare earth elements are also ones used in very high-tech electronics and precision engineering, but also for electromagnetic and magnetic field modulation. So I think what we're looking at there is the actual physics of how this Buga Sphere would spin and lose its mass and levitate, sort of anti-gravity, is very much connected to this unique alloy that the shell of the Buga Sphere, which is 2 or 3 centimeters thick, it's an inch to an inch and a half thick, and that aluminum alloy not only doesn't match any known existing ones on Earth, but it also has elements in it that weren't even known on Earth until a little over 100 years ago. I also want to point out that the aluminum process, how you make aluminum from bauxite ore, was not even invented until the late 1800s and didn't go into widespread use until the very late 1800s and early 20th century. Before then, aluminum in its state of just pure aluminum was so rare it would be found where there had been a high temperature like volcano or something that would naturally be hot enough to smelt it out of the ore, was more valuable than gold. Gold was nowhere near as precious as aluminum was prior to the modern era. So that's a very interesting fact as well, because human civilization didn't even have the ability to make something like this, at least the modern industrial human civilization, until the late 1800s, early 1900s. And I think these findings are going to be it's additive, that with the carbon dating of the resin that's in the actual portals around the center. And then another interesting part about this is that the the metallurgy would indicate that if there was a compound that was of this precise composition, if it does exist on Earth, it's classified. In other words, it wouldn't be in a database that it matches with. And but when you look at this object and its age, it would indicate more and more that it's of a non-human extraterrestrial origin, and that it was one that was either teleported here, which we can talk about that, and we'll get into this a little more with the discussion with Ashton Forbes about the Malaysian jet that vanished in thin air, but also where the manufacturing of an ET object isn't, you don't dig up ore and smelt it and then weld it together into a Boeing jet or a car. They actually use a type of technology where it sets up a frequency at a very basic level of space-time in the 0 point, and they materialize all those elements. It's sort of like a 3D printing. It all comes out as one. And this is true of all the ET craft that have been analyzed after we've downed them in crash retrievals. And it's also true of parts of craft that have been studied by scientists I know who work under contract with either CIA or some tech company. And I think this would then explain why the sphere itself, when you look at it, and when we were boring into these little ports to get this metal sample, there were aspects of it that were integrated in the metal that looked like communication or perhaps little hair-like fiber optics or something, but they weren't like running along the outside wall or something. They're integrated into the actual skin and the thickness of the aluminum sphere, which is very unusual. And it's not at all how we manufacture things. If you take apart any solid state device you have, it's a zillion little parts welded and put together. This is not how ET manufacturing happens. So I think all of this would indicate that we're dealing with a bona fide non-human extraterrestrial device. And then on top of it, you have this breakthrough that's just happened where two separate teams of linguistic experts have analyzed the symbols and found that they were of a Proto-Sanskrit foundation or origin. And those words and symbols have been translated. And it's sort of ominous because it sort of seems to indicate at the time that was made of some catastrophic event that happened from the sun or some cosmic event. And we know that was at the time of the ending of the last ice age, and there were a lot of so-called earth changes and geophysical changes. The question is, why are now all of these? We have 5 videos of 5 separate Buga Sphere activations now that we have received from Jaime Mason out of Mexico City, because he's in touch with everyone in Colombia, South America, where these objects are happening in and around the vicinity of Buga, B-U-G-A, Colombia, which is how it got the name Buga Sphere. And that would indicate that there's some kind of Buga Sphere activations, plural, because there are multiple of them, that would, it could be portending that we're coming up on a time of significant geophysical changes or something. So it's a bit interesting to say the least. So I think that's more to follow. I think what we're going to do at some point, they also found that when people went into a room and chanted mantras, which interestingly originate from Sanskrit, and the symbols on there are Proto-Sanskrit, the sphere starts putting out electromagnetic fields of energy anomalously. I wonder if I had a dream last night, actually, if we went in and did a puja, which is all in Sanskrit, a whole long puja, and meditated to see what this sphere would do, if it would start interacting in any way. Now, a lot of people who are new haven't followed this, but since the early 90s, I've told people that the Sanskrit language is the root of all Indo-European languages. Proto-Sanskrit would be just a very ancient version of modern, what we have today as Sanskrit. But that the Sanskrit language, the words and the vibrations of those sounds are known as name and form. In other words, the word for water, akshmaniyam, you can use it and materialize water. or the same thing for fruit, or same thing. And you hear of the enlightened and masters being able to materialize objects with this kind of frequency and consciousness. Now, it's interesting that this sphere has Proto-Sanskrit on it, seems to be reacting to mantras. And of course, one of the foundational aspects of CE5 contact, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind contact, is the meditative state using those frequencies in the mantras.
Mhm.
And, and this was something that I experienced when I was 18, where it was very clear to me that the science of consciousness and the whole Vedic knowledge, which, by the way, precedes any organized religion. People associate it with Buddhism and Hinduism, but that's not true. It actually precedes any of those. So I think it's very important for people to begin to connect a couple dots here. And that is the ancient science of knowledge and even these ancient technologies, some of which are referred to a little bit in the Bhagavad Gita, the Vimanas, the UFOs flying around, but it seems to go back way to pre-recorded history. Now connect that dot and the science of consciousness and CE5 contact to the idea that this Buga Sphere is actually an operating anti-gravity and communication device that seems to have not only the Proto-Sanskrit symbols on it, but seems to react to mantras being chanted in that frequency. So this gets into a very interesting analysis. And this is why, we've been working on a film that we're totally at this point scrapping, and we're going to do a whole new film using the new whistleblower testimony, but all this new information from the Buga Sphere. And another breaking news story is that we've received, I don't know, 6,000 pages so far of documents from a source who has been working with 7 defectors from illegal covert programs dealing with UAPs and UFOs. And some of them are quite explosive in terms of exposing what was going on with some of the aerospace contractors who were gaslighting and deceiving the US government. What the senior CIA guy I've known since the 90s calls the Rat Pack. And that will be a great little sub chapter of this new film, the Rat Pack. And he talks about how they have been deceiving the US government, the media, and the public, and the UFO community for, quote, decades. I'm quoting from an email he sent me some years ago after the whole kerfuffle happened with the Tic Tac and Lou Elizondo and that whole Rat Pack of disinformation operatives. Now we have documents connecting all of them to receiving millions of dollars in research funds through Bigelow Aerospace, and then reporting back falsified conclusions on things like the Tic Tac. And yet at the same time, it has a lot of information on real research that's very interesting. So now it's going to take us a while to go through all that. We're going to have get an AI program to be able to go through this volume of material, because I'd go blind looking through all of them word by word. But it's an extraordinary development. The other thing to realize is that we're going to be receiving more of these documents apparently, and there may be some new whistleblowers related to it. So we're going to do an entirely new outline of this film and pivot to something that is just to catch up with the amazing breakthroughs of the last month or so. All of this, I'm telling you, has happened in the last 30 days. So this is where you sort of stop the presses and say, okay, now we have something 10 times more explosive to reveal that will be coming out. And we hope we can finish this so it comes out in 2026 sometime. So that's our goal with the new film we're going to be doing. And then just one other thing, we will be doing a Gaia Sphere event in November. Unfortunately, the dates aren't here on my sheet, but it's sometime in November. And we're going to do a fundraiser for all this disclosure work on the Friday night before the Gaia Sphere event. So if you want to help us and want to have a small private gathering with me, we're going to have a whole afternoon and evening for major significant funders who want to help fund this, because we're encountering enormous expenses, not only with the film but with the scientific analysis of all of this material, and also the investigators who are liaisoning with us to the senior law enforcement officials in the United States who are now moving very quickly. I will tell you that the most important developments in disclosure you are not going to see on the internet or on the news, or certainly not in a congressional hearing as they are currently configured. It's happening in the sphere of covert investigators on the side of disclosure, working with the most senior law enforcement people in the United States. And that is what's happening and it's happening very quickly. Now, I am liaisoning that information confidentially to certain members of Congress, and they're aware of it and are cooperating. So that's about all I can say about that, just because I have to hold some of this confidential because I've agreed to do so. So that's sort of a quick trip update on all of that. And one of the things I also want to mention is that with these new documents, one of the things that stood out to me was the amount of money that was obtained. You know, I don't know if you guys remember during COVID, I think it was in 2021, General Herbert, Bob Herbert, he had been sort of right hand to Senator Harry Reid, who was the majority leader of the Senate back in the day. Herbert had left the Pentagon as a general and was an assistant on the UFO UAP issue for Senator Reid, who was very interested in this. His home state was Nevada. And Senator Reid ended up mentoring Senator Marco Rubio, who, as co-chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, along with the chairman, Senator Warner, really began to drill down a few years ago on the UAP issue. And I had been asked, of course, to go in and provide information in a SCIF, a secure compartment information facility, of what we had, because they had been investigating it for a couple years and just hit a lead wall. Interestingly, the chief investigator, who would be the equivalent of a three-star general if he'd stayed in the Pentagon, told me that he went out to the Lockheed Skunk Works and ended up finding a bunch of old antique jets and stuff, and he knew he was being lied to and gaslit. He was smart enough to know and that's when they reached out to us, and then everything changed, frankly. So, of course, there's a new leadership at the Senate Intelligence Committee and a new chair and co-chair, because Mr. Rubio became the Secretary of State, as you know, a few months ago. But at any rate, that's what's going on at that level. And around before that time, however, General Herbert contacted me. He says, look, we gave tens of millions of dollars to Bigelow Aerospace, which was Robert Bigelow, who I'd met in 1993 at Lawrence Rockefeller's ranch. He was a billionaire of Las Vegas who had a hotel chain. And then he had gotten intercepted by Colonel John Alexander and a number of other people who were in this disinformation rat pack that had been operational since the 70s and 80s. And Bigelow Aerospace had a contract to do a report on all of this to the U.S. government. And it was, at the initial amount, was $22 million. And of course, this came all out in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times some years ago. But what they ended up giving General Herbert and Senator Reid, quote unquote, was not even a snapshot from 40,000 feet. In other words, he said, we didn't get anything of substance. Meanwhile, in these files that we have obtained from internally are all the hot stuff they did find and do have on crash retrievals, on all kinds of tech, on the science, equations and formulae for gravity control, anti-gravity, whatever you want to call it, 0 point, all this. And this is what we've just received. And it's several thousand pages. I think it's 5,000 or 6,000 pages. But what I'm saying here is that there's a lot to go through, to say the least. I'm going to have to redact anything that could be an operating system that could be weaponized, because I have a responsibility to do so. And I have promised the government since Clinton that that's what we would do, since these can be very dangerous technologies if they are weaponized. But the scandal of all this, quite frankly, is that what was given to the people who used Pentagon funding, but was authorized by Congress back in the early 2000s to get to the bottom of this, ended up being whitewashed and watered down. And yet they were doing all this other work, right, under clandestine contracts with the Defense Intelligence Agency and other entities. So we can now prove this through these documents. Now, the question then becomes, how many crimes were committed by taking those sums of money from the government and covering up their findings? Because, and this is exactly what Dr. Kirkpatrick did with Arrow. The Congress passed laws and funded an office to get to the bottom of the UAP UFO issue. And that became an operation which we can now prove, and which has been concluded, by the way, by certain members of Congress and senior U.S. federal law enforcement as having been a cover-up operation. So there you're talking about multiple felonies of defrauding the government, abuse and misuse of government funds, et cetera, and so on. The only question is going to be, do we have enough now to prove all this? Yes. The question is, how much stomach is there to go to prosecution, right? That's where it becomes very political, unfortunately. But all we can do is put the facts together and make our recommendations to the Congress and to the president and to the Department of Justice and the FBI, et cetera. But that is where that is. And I will tell you that this is very explosive information. So this new documentary we're going to do, I think, could probably be spun off into a whole series that'll be dealing with not only this ancient non-human object, the Buga Sphere object, 12,500 years ago, flying around, but now we have all this recent history. And you'll look at the timing of it. In 2001, we did the National Press Club event that kicked off the modern disclosure era. This whole period. Now, we had been doing it before then, but it was quiet, and it was not that public. It was called Project Starlight, which was a code name that I didn't give it. A man who was friends with the CIA director for Bill Clinton named it, and that's when we had our first gatherings of top secret whistleblowers in 1995, and then in 1997 for members of Congress. And once we realized that neither the president nor Congress were going to do anything, we organized the what's now known as the launch of the global disclosure movement in 2001 at the National Press Club with 22 of these witnesses and whistleblowers. But at this point now I've debriefed over 700 or 800 of them, and we have new ones coming in all the time. And there's another whole group of 7 that are very key that have just surfaced, that have dealt specifically with the technologies and the 0 point and electrogravitics and things of this sort. So this continues to grow, and we do appreciate everyone's help and support, because we are not receiving money from the government or a corporation. We're doing this all out of our own ability to fund it and raise the funds to do it on a not just U.S. scale, but on a global scale. All over the world, as well as operations that we have in United Kingdom, Canada, and elsewhere. So those of you who can help and come to our event in Boulder in November, I think Raven probably knows the dates.
Yeah, it's November. Our fundraiser is November 7th, and then the Buga Sphere event is the 8th and 9th on that weekend.
Yeah, so it'd be fun to see everybody there who can make it. And hopefully also the weekend in the Buga Sphere will be fun. We'll be talking a lot about the Buga Sphere and the Buga Sphere, which is kind of funny, but why not? So that's sort of a quick update of the last couple weeks that we've been pulling this together. The metallurgy report, we will release at some point. We're trying to get clearance from the lab to put their name onto it as we release it. Normally, it's a very high-end lab, but once we have that answer, we'll know if that's going to be redacted or not. But as soon as we have that answer, we'll release the full report. It's 110 pages of metallurgy analysis on the metal components of the Buga Sphere.
Great. Well, we have Mr. Ashton Forbes that has joined us. So